Hello, and welcome to the Brasil Infrastructure webinar. We want to thank everyone for joining us today. Quickly, I'll give a sense of kind of the overview of the webinar, and then I'll introduce our three Brazilian thought leaders who are going to offer some perspective on infrastructure in particular as a sector in Brazil and kind of the current trends and the current environment. The objective of this webinar, as many of you know, is to gather Brazilian subject matter experts. We have three distinguished subject matter experts, thought leaders on this call with us today to discuss notable trends in infrastructure in particular for this topic of this webinar, as well as give an overview of what we see ahead. So against the backdrop of the current environment we're in, to give us a sense of how infrastructure has fared as a sector in Brazil, and particularly the relationship between Brazil and the US in terms of infrastructure and the idea of essentially the investment opportunities that are available and that continue to be very active in the country. We have 45 minutes together today, so at 1:45 Eastern time, we will need to stop. I know there's a busy schedule, so we'll conclude at 1:45. We're going to kick off with some prepared remarks from each of our three speakers to give just some prepared thoughts about their perspective and how they look at infrastructure and where they come at this very important sector from their standpoint. That will then be followed by an open Q&A. So we invite those on the call to certainly take yourselves off mute. Remember that you are on mute. Take yourselves off mute at that point and feel free to ask questions. So I'll open it for questions at that point, and we'll see what we can talk about in that Q&A section. And again, just as a quick reminder, we are recording the session and we'll use parts of it again in different environments. So it is being recorded. Now I'd like to very briefly introduce our three speakers and ask that they address the group and give, again, a perspective of infrastructure and what's happening in Brazil as it relates to this whole important sector. The first is the Brazilian Minister of Regional Development, Rogério Marinho. We have the pleasure of having him join us. So he'll kick us off with some remarks specifically about infrastructure and just the regional development. Marta Sellier is the Special Secretary of the Secretariat of the Investments Partnerships Program. Will also then jump in and give us a few prepared remarks. Thank you for joining us. And Roberto Escoto is the Investment Manager for ApexBrasil, and he'll finish off the three group kind of presentation and prepared remarks. And after that, as we talked about, we'll open it to questions. So with that, I'll ask Mr. Mariano if you would like to address the group.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to say that it is very important this moment and this event so that we can give the impression that forms the the way that the Brazilian government is behaving in this new normal. We are before a pandemic that by one hand could mean an economical retraction or difficulty, but on the other hand, it could also be a process of re-aging the country, preparing the country to a new set of investments due to the liquidity that there is in the world today, and also by the fact that we have good projects to be presented with legal insurance, with respect to the contract, and with forecastability. Recently, Brazil has approved the framework of sanitation. We had a 6-year battle in the Brazilian parliament. The leadership of President Bolsonaro was decisive in this process. We had 3 administrations to come to a point in which we had a disclosure. We are in the process of regulation of this law, which has already been sanctioned by the president, which gives us a perspective due to the market, which is presented in terms of investments of over $100 billion in the next 10 years. We're talking about at least 100 million Brazilians without adequate sewage system, and over 30 million without treated water, plus 3 million dumps spread all over the national territory. So there is a big market to be explored, and this is a very important perspective for the government, which brings the private initiative so that we can face this challenge of the universalization of sanitation. We're also preparing our ministry so that our portfolio can be certified in the programs of its portfolio through emissions of green bonds. And this is being worked with CBI, the Community Bonds Initiative, that will certify our portfolio, both in the area of sanitation as well as in the area of food security. So the revitalization of water basins, of course, there is a great demand for green bonds in the world, and all the projects that we are presenting in next 3 months, when we have the negotiations already concluded with CBI, then we're going to have, we are going to allow the interpreters, the investors to be part in our portfolio to be able to issue green bonds so that they can leverage their perspective. Another important perspective is the revitalization of hydro basins. For us, this is very important. It is the bottleneck of our, it is the spinal, is the core of our endeavors. There is no doubt that water security is very important. Brazil, because of its dimension and the complexity of areas that it has, many differences in terms of human development. It's huge, such as the Brazilian Northeastern, which has 28% of the Brazilian population and 14% of our GDP. And this is an opportunity to work with the revitalization of important bases in that region. In the Middle Eastern, in the Middle Eastern, we have Taquari Basin in Pantanal, as well as Tocantins and Araguaia that spring in that area, and in the north in Pará, but also the Paraíba River, but especially our San Francisco River. We call this river the most important river in the country because of its geographical conditions, as well as by the fact that it runs the whole Brazilian semi-arid, which is a region of over 20 million inhabitants, which is extremely debilitated from the economical perspective. So our idea is to present a great plan of revitalization of the spaces that will take into account in the San Francisco River, not only in the river itself, as well as the channels that have been done because of the transposition, with over 600 kilometers of channels or canals. We're talking about over 1,000 cities that will need to have their sewage as well as their solid residue treated, as well as the water needs to be treated so the quality water can be given. Also, the replantation of riparian forests. We're talking about over 20,000 seedlings of riparian forests, as well as the preservation of the springs. So it's a great project we're going to present, and certainly we're going to have all the condition of making all the necessary investments, since we have the appeal of sustainability of the environment, as well as job generation and income, as well as the sustainable development. I have also the intention of, in October, visiting an experience that is very successful that happened over 100 years ago in the United States, which was the transposition of Colorado River, which allowed that region of California and Arizona, New Mexico, to be a prosperous region, as well as a region that is able to be probably one of the biggest producers of food in the United States, but also the biggest producers of new technologies. That's where you have the Silicon Valley, Hollywood. There, a series of other industries and economical cases happen there because of water security. Los Angeles is a great example, a city that only exists because of the water transposition. So we believe that water security in the central region of Brazil, as well as in the most depressed regions of Brazil, meets the desires of dealing with sustainability as a development, and by the same token, respecting the environment, generating jobs, incomes, and opportunities. And we would really like to have private initiative with us in this great endeavor and challenge. I hope I didn't exceed my time.
No, not at all. Thank you so much. Marta, do you want to lead us into the second group of prepared remarks?
I was explaining about the Investment Partnership Program in Brazil, the PPI, that it was created to be a hub for opportunities in investments in infrastructure in Brazil and also privatizations. So it's a recent program when you consider it was it began working in 2016, but we have already delivered 178 projects since PPI was created. And those projects are already bringing important investments to Brazil and will bring to Brazil more than $163 billion during the years of those contracts. Plus, those projects bring important bonuses for Brazilian federal government. So we expect to get more than $32 billion bonuses with the projects PPI has already auctioned since it began working in 2016. Last year was a very important year for PPI. We had 36 auctions in different sectors, mainly transportation and energy, oil and gas and energy. And only the auctions of last year will bring investments of more than $100 billion to Brazil. So the agenda of PPI was going very well until coronavirus. We had to reinvent a bit of our business. Some sectors were more hit and affected than others. That's an example for airports. We had a big issue with a lack of demand for many months. Now it's slowly recovering, but I would say airports are one of the most affected sectors here in Brazil. Even though we are moving forward with the opportunity for investments, private investments in Brazilian airports, so that you understand how big our portfolio is. We have 22 airports right now that we finished the feasibility studies for a PPP, 30 years PPP for those airports. And now we're dialoguing with our audit court to finish the analysis, and we expect to have the auction happening in February, March next year. So even though one of the most affected sectors of Brazil is still recovering, we are moving forward with the opportunities because we understand we have very solid 30-year contracts to offer. We have a growing demand in Brazil for this sector and excellent opportunity for investors. So since we're talking about 30-year contracts and we're dealing with a short-term health crisis, we don't intend to stop with our offers and opportunities. We had to delay them 2 or 3 months to make some adjustments, but we keep forward with this portfolio. Same thing for roads opportunities, for railways. We have a very important railway project that was just sent to our audit court for analysis. The feasibility studies are done. It's the Ferrogrão, the railway that will link the state of Goiás to the state of Pará, with more than 1,000 kilometers of railways for Brazil to help bring the crops production to the port of Miritituba in Pará. So very important project that is also going on, moving forward together with investment opportunity in railways in Bahia as well. We have the Minister of Infrastructure very focused in doubling the capacity of railways in Brazil. And we've been working a lot with private partnerships to get these investments, all those investments done so that we can have more railways than roads. Brazil today is very dependent on roads, and we believe railways have also a very sustainable appeal. They are green projects that will help us reduce emissions and pollution in Brazil. Also in ports, excellent opportunities such as the Port of Santos, the largest port of Latin America that is being structured as a PPP here in Brazil. Plus we have other port investment opportunities. We have oil and gas opportunities, energy generation, energy transmission, and we are trying to make our portfolio each time more diverse, going through PPPs with parks administrations, PPP with forest administration, and this agenda is very important for the sustainability of our forests and the preservation of the environment here in Brazil. We have projects in urban mobility, in basic sanitation, in daycares, in hospitals, even in prisons. So our portfolio is very rich. I can say that Brazil has the largest PPP concessions and privatization program of the world, considering all the projects we have in our portfolio and all the deliveries that we've been doing. So even if coronavirus, we keep still strong and forward with the projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta, for that. Roberto, do you want to take us to talk a little bit about the role of ApexBrasil in all of this and the role that we play across sectors and just the job that you do in terms of infrastructure and investments of these kinds?
Okay, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here with our Ministry of Regional Development and with our Special Secretary, Marta Sellier. The role of ApexBrasil is to support foreign investors in establishing or in expanding operations in Brazil. We focus on provide partnerships for these investors with Brazilian companies and or committing capital in Brazil through funds and companies. Of course, we are facing this pandemic, and most of our actions are being postponed or canceled. But ApexBrasil continues to work hard to provide qualified information to our investors to mitigate the impacts of the coronavirus crisis. For example, in the very beginning of this crisis, we launched a hot site for supporting not only Brazilian companies, but foreign investors, particularly providing updated and qualified information regarding all measures the federal government has taken to overcome this serious crisis we have faced. We also launched a new platform for investors, investinbrazil.com.br, in order to provide our digital services available to investors, including we were praised by UNTAD and WIPA, the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies, for our proactivity since the beginning of the outbreak of the coronavirus. So our role is not only to promote hundreds of opportunities we have in different sectors of our economy. Currently, we support 8 sectors: infrastructure, oil and gas, agribusiness, renewables, health and life science, aerospace, automotive, and venture capital and private equity. So we have supported more than, in the last 10 years, for example, we have supported more than 1,300 investors all over the world. And we facilitated more than 200 projects, totaling $26.5 billion. ApexBrasil has cooperated in order to, with Brazil, to be the 6th biggest destination of foreign direct investments in the world. Last year, Brazil received $72 billion, increasing 20% comparing to 2018. So even during this economic and health crisis, we think that Brazil will continue being among the top 10 biggest FDI destination in the world. So we have a lot of services that we provide for foreign investors which are willing to invest in Brazil. For example, we help them to identification of suitable locations. We provide general information on a cost in Brazil, the cost of labor, cost of rentals, information about the business environment and the talent pool availability. We have worked with PPI last year, for example, together with PPI and the Ministry of Infrastructure. We have organized a lot of seminars and roundtables, usually along with the presidential missions. For example, in India, in the United Emirates, in China, and the last mission before the pandemic crisis was in the United States, in Miami. So in these events, with a lot of ministers and authorities, and of course, with a lot of entrepreneurs and potential investors, Apex promotes a lot of opportunities. And after that, we, in contact with these investors, and together with these public stakeholders, we facilitate the process of investing in Brazil. So our goal is to take the investor by the hand and bring them to invest in Brazil, because Brazil is a country of millions of people and opportunities. There is no doubt that we have a huge market in Brazil, and it's one of the most important reasons to invest in Brazil. And Brazil is a platform for export to other countries in Latin America. So even with this economic crisis, Brazil continues being a hub for investments and a hub for exports to other countries, particularly in Latin America. So it's important to note that much of the country's infrastructure potential remains unexploited, and the infrastructure sector is posing strong growth, independent from general economic trends in the world. And I'd like to add that tomorrow we'll carry out a big event of infrastructure. We already have more than 850 participants registered from almost 50 countries in this event, where the Minister of Regional Development will speak, and our Special Secretary Marta Sellier, along with the Minister Tarcísio, the Minister of Infrastructure, and other speakers. So it's gonna be a very important opportunity to talk with potential investors and show them that Brazil has a lot of very good opportunities to invest. And from now on until November, we'll have other infrastructure events. The next one will be in August, focused on the US market. and we'll have others focused on sanitation, focused on ports, and 2 events focused on the markets of Turkey and China. So ApexBrasil stands ready to assist all investors interested in investing in Brazil. So my initial words are this, and I will be available for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you. And thank all 3 of you for your thoughtful comments. Appreciate it. At this point in the call, we're going to open it up to questions. So if there are any questions, I know we have a few questions as well, but do want to open the floor. Just unmute your line if you have a question. And if there's a particular person you want to direct your question to, please just name them and feel free to ask your questions at this point in the call.
Hi, Laura, I have a question. It's Joe Rowley here from Latin Finance.
Hi, Joe. Go ahead. I think it's a little hard to hear you, so you might, I don't know if that's only me though, but you might want to talk a little bit louder.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Okay.
First of all, thanks for putting on the event. It was really interesting to hear everyone's comments on the infrastructure sector. My question is to Minister Marinho, and there are two parts to the question. You mentioned at the start of your comments that you expect to see greater use of green bonds by investors to help finance these projects in the sanitation sector. First of all, could you tell me if you have any estimates of how much you expect to raise or you expect to see from the use of green bonds for these projects? And secondly, what role do you expect BNDES to play in terms of financing these projects going forward, given that BNDES is obviously moving back from financing in order to let more private financing in? So it would be great to hear your comments on both of those points.
First of all, thank you for the question. We have 2 parts, as you said. In regards to the green bonds, this is another attraction per se to the investments that we are allowing for in this specific area that you mentioned, which is sanitation. There is nothing that marries the couples better economy and environment, or economy and health, than treating sewage and water and trash and the water so that it can decrease child mortality as well as increase lifespan and increase the productivity of companies. So certainly there are a lot of pension funds all over the globe, as well as many investors that in their compliance, it is determined that they only invest, or they have a percentage of investment that is directed towards actions that take into account sustainability as well as the environment. So if we take it into account that there is a market, so these $100 billion that I mentioned in the beginning, which is our expectation in the next 10 years, 1% of these funds could be translated with the issuing of these bonds as well as debentures, which is another law that is already it's a bill that is in the Brazilian National Congress, and I believe that based on the mood of the Congress, it will be approved very soon. I believe that today Eletrobras is our Codevas, which is the company of development of the San Francisco Valley. They have the conditions with the government of issuing green bonds. But we actually want to allow for investors that join the concessions or that win the biddings that establish the private partnership with the country. They are the ones that will be enabled. And for that, we are carrying out a work of certification of all of our program, not of specific projects, along with CBI. This is the conclusion. I believe that 10 or 15% of the funds that we are imagining could be channeled through bonds, but we already have a portfolio from BNDES, and over 50 billion reais around $10 billion, ready to be bid. First bidding will take place in September in the state of Alagoas, but there is already 8 or 10 projects ready to, according to the reality of the new law. This is done by BNDES. And we also have another fund, which is PEP, which is being structured by Caixa Econômica Federal, which has a smaller portfolio, but it's working especially in small municipalities. We have something like 40 or 45 projects, both in the areas of sanitation as well as public lighting. The first one will be launched, Marta is following that, right? It will be launched in August. We are going to have the first PPE for auction for public lighting, which is being done by Caixa Econômica. But bear in mind that BNDES has few legs given the volume of the portfolios that are being made available due to the way the government has carried out with the legislative towards modernizing the legal frameworks and creating the mechanism to draw foreign capital. And this is why dealing internally with finding other entities that can structure projects that can be performed along with the market. I hope I have answered your question.
That's great. Thanks. Thanks for that.
Are there any other questions from the group? I was going to ask one question of the Special Secretary. You spoke a little bit about how COVID, the impact and how coronavirus has kind of changed the focus a bit, or not changed, but we are recovering and moving forward in ways, and how we're thinking about the projects that we're investing in, railroads and the ports, and how important those have become with airports right now for every country, kind of a little bit of an uncertainty. And the idea of the green projects. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, has coronavirus caused, kind of the focus of how you're focusing on the different infrastructure projects to change a bit, just because of the given nature of the virus? And has that had somewhat of even a different impact? And this idea of now looking at green travel is a little bit different than airports, just by necessity because of what's happened to us all.
Yes, of course. So in the short term, what was very important was to have quick answers from Brazilian government to the investors that are already operating those infrastructures in Brazil. So we needed to make sure all those infrastructures wouldn't be affected in terms of levels of service or even capability of receiving all the users during this period. So I mentioned the airports were one of the most affected sectors. The federal government immediately helped the actual investors that are already in Brazil with postponing some taxes, postponing some obligation of payments, also with a standstill on the financing of the contract. So we immediately sat at the table to understand what they were going through and rebalance their contracts. Now we're going to begin a more delicate discussion on evaluating how much they need to be rebalanced. And we will only have the answer to this after the crisis is effectively gone, so that we can calculate exactly how much loss they had, and somehow Brazilian government can compensate them. So this is a very important characteristic of our contracts, of our infrastructure contracts, because we have a risk distribution in the contracts. And although the demand risk is a risk of the private partner, when we have a situation like a force majeure, when something happens and is not expected, can be the fault of the investor, we can rebalance this contract in favor of these investors. And this type of quick answer and solution to the investors we already have in Brazil is helping us to show also how important our portfolio is and to bring new investors to the next infrastructure opportunities. So first of all, we took care of the investors we already have, and then focus on going forward with the projects we're structuring for the future auctions. And for those future auctions, what we've seen is that some sectors like ports have been growing in Brazil even during the crisis. So it only makes the appetite for this type of infrastructure even bigger. Also, roads that went down for a while now are already recovering because of the importance of cargo in Brazil, and cargo hasn't stopped moving during this period. For energy, we had a reduction on demand, so we had to postpone some generation auctions because of that, but we will recover those actions next year. Also for transmission lines, we were supposed to have an auction in July, and we postponed it for December. So our auction on transmissions is happening in December. On the other hand, we had an excellent opportunity to discuss some important bills in Congress. So as the Minister Rogério said, it was this period that helped us make the priority on the bill of sanitation in Brazil. So we were discussing here the importance of keeping people safe in their houses, but the truth is in Brazil, some 35 million people still don't get water to their houses. So this whole crisis also helped us bring this priority notion to Congress to vote some important bills that were being discussed for years, like basic sanitation bill was being discussed since 2016. So 4 years of discussion, and somehow it's the coronavirus that helped us approve this bill. And we believe now we are going to open the doors for private investments in this sector. And we're talking about $100 billion in the next years. So we hope the same thing is going to happen in the gas market, that we're also discussing a bill that can be voted in the next weeks, and some other important bills in Congress that we believe are really opening the country for private investments in Brazil.
So something good kind of comes out of something bad, right? Yeah. The crisis forces us all to kind of move faster. So that's good news.
Exactly.
I know we're kind of at time. If there is any very, very quick question remaining, let me know. You of course can also follow up if there's any questions outstanding with our team, and all of you have our contact information. So we're happy to get in touch with any of these three speakers afterwards if there are follow-up questions that anyone wants to ask. But if there's anything quick that you want to ask in the next 5 minutes, feel free. Give a second. No worries. Well, I know that you all have a hard stop, and I know certainly with the meeting that's happening tomorrow, there's a lot going on. So we appreciate your time. Thank you so much. I think it paints a really nice picture for the state of the sector and certainly for investments in infrastructure as it relates to Brazil. So we're grateful for the time and the perspective that you've given us. Thank you. And again, if there are any follow-up questions, we can help facilitate getting answers to those to any of our guests who joined the webinar. Thanks everyone for joining.